Well, it's a little while since we read the psalm, so I don't know if you can still remember the last verse of that psalm. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his decrees. Don't know if you got it. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his decrees. Don't know what you make of it. If these words implied a promise that life will never throw up difficulty, pain, or trouble to those who walk in God's paths, I would have no time for them. For they would have proven untrue thousands of times over. Just this week, for example, I have heard from or about various friends who are struggling for life and livelihood in harrowing situations. Some, of course, might respond by saying that Psalm 25 verse 10 reveals that my friends must not have really kept God's covenant or decrees, because if they had, well, they would know only the steadfast love and faithfulness of the Lord. Well, such an application of the psalm is plain wrong. I know this because, first of all, keeping God's covenant does not mean living a perfect life. Rather, it means putting things right when you discover you have done wrong. Do not remember the sins of my youth or my transgressions, prays the psalmist, confident that God will forgive the sins of the contrite. The God who calls us into covenant knows our humanness and provides a means of restoration whenever we fail or fall. Second thing is this: bad things do happen to good people. We all know this by experience, but we also know it from our reading of the Bible. You might have noticed it in today's gospel reading. Immediately after his baptism, Jesus was driven by the Spirit into the wilderness, where he was tested, tried, or perhaps tempted by Satan. As we continue to read Mark's Gospel, we discover that the path of the Holy One of God led through Gethsemane and Golgotha too. Most of us know the temptation story from Matthew or Luke, so it's worth recounting the entire episode in Mark. We found it, as we read, in Mark chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. Here it is. And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness for 40 days, tested by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. That's the temptation of Jesus story in Mark. It's a bit different, isn't it? That's it. So short, but so full of intriguing content. Notice, first of all, that Jesus doesn't do anything in this story. Not really. That's to say that for a change in Mark's gospel, Jesus is not the main actor. He's not so much acting as being acted upon. The Spirit drives him into the wilderness, and the angels wait on him or serve him. And by the way, you might have noticed when it was read earlier that the scene falls immediately after the scene of the baptism of Jesus. Just as the children of Israel emerged out of the Red Sea into 40 years of testing in the wilderness, So Jesus comes through the water into 40 days of testing, again in the wilderness. Indeed, this short account in Mark's Gospel mentions the wilderness twice. It must be important. Not only that, but the Spirit drives Jesus out into the wilderness. It is part of the plan of God, carried out by the Spirit. Once there, of course, Jesus is put to the test by Satan. I don't know about you, but I can't help thinking about the story of Job. Do you remember him? God boasts about Job to Satan in that story in the Old Testament. God boasts to Satan, the adversary, about Job. So Satan says, "Let me have him. You won't boast about him after I have finished with him," or something to that effect. Then Job is severely tested by Satan. Similarly, here in Mark's Gospel, the voice has just come from heaven. "This is my Son, my beloved. With him I am well pleased." God boasts about Jesus there. Then immediately, Jesus is put to the test by the adversary, by Satan. And what about the wild beasts? What are we to make of them? He was with the wild beasts. Doesn't tell us what he did with them. He was with the wild beasts. What are we to make of that? Perhaps we're to think of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, at peace with the wild beasts. Perhaps we're to think of Noah and his rescue mission for all the animals of the world. Or should we rather think about other writings of the ancient world, biblical and otherwise, where wild beasts are associated with demons? Or should we think of the books of Daniel and Revelation, where the wild beasts symbolize the oppressive imperial powers arrayed against the people of God? The first readers of Mark's Gospel might have thought about the wild beasts that Christians and others would face in the Roman arena. Is Jesus in a wilderness arena, flanked by the Spirit and the angels, up against Satan and the demon wild beasts? Mark, it seems, like a good number of the books of the Bible, Mark, it seems, pulls back the curtain to reveal the otherworldly reality behind the circumstances of earthly human conflict. So that from now on, whenever Jesus faces tests set for him by his opponents in Mark's Gospel, we might think back to this wilderness scene. We might learn what Paul tells us in his letter. "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." In such circumstances, the angels ministered to Jesus. As Elijah was fed in the wilderness for a 40 days journey ahead, so too the angels waited on Jesus before, after, or during the 40 days in his wilderness. Well, I'm sure that much of the wilderness story tells of the unique struggle of the only beloved Son of the Father. You are not Jesus, and neither am I. Yet, if we are followers of Jesus, might we not follow him through baptism and into the wilderness? Might we not find that in Jesus, the wilderness can become, even for us, a place of grace and mercy? Might we not find that in trial and tribulation, we are not alone? Might we not find a table in the wilderness, where in Eucharistic bread and wine we might feed on Christ in our souls? In pandemic lockdown and isolation, we are not alone. We are loved by an everlasting love. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou spreadest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Well, the psalm we began with, Psalm 25, does not say, all the paths of the Lord are sweetness and light. It promises rather that those who walk in the Lord's paths will know the steadfast love and faithfulness of the Lord, even in times of darkness and distress. The psalm may say something too about perspective. Those who live in covenant relationship with God look for and discover the grace and help of God in time of need. Lent provides an opportunity for us to walk with the risen one on the journey to the cross. There we find new perspective on life. With George Matheson, we learn to say, "O joy that seeks for me through pain, I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow through the rain and feel the promise is not vain, that morn shall tearless be." Or with the psalmist, we might simply say, "Unto you, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be afraid. Let not my enemies triumph over me. For all the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his decrees." Even in pandemic wilderness, we can find it so. Thanks be to God. Amen.